Right. There is a hand. Do you have a question?
Thank you. Really interested to listen to the speech. So I'm Margie Newins. I'm a councillor in Southwark. I chair the Council's Environment Scrutiny Commission. I also work for a sustainable business network, Blue Patch. We've heard all about electric vehicles, and I think often there is a tendency to believe that electric vehicles are the solution to all our problems. But as we know, they are not carbon neutral in production. They will not be carbon neutral until our grid is. We know that there is increasing evidence that non-tailpipe emissions actually dwarf tailpipe emissions. So I think the speaker, Jacob talked about air pollution, but actually the increasing weight and size of vehicles is generating ever more non-tailpipe pollution. I understand that 36% of the microplastics in our oceans are actually likely to be tyre particulates. I know that Claire also alluded to the fact that since 2016, she alluded to the fact that our transport efficiency, that our carbon footprint in transport is actually not dropping in the same way, and that is very much to do with the increased size of vehicles that people are driving, and the increased weight also, which is exacerbated by increasing size of batteries. There are and another obvious one is the fact that, of course, in order to charge them, I think the Royal Horticultural Society has estimated that between 2005 and 2015, about 20% of front gardens in London were paved over, with huge loss of biodiversity and a huge increase in risk of flooding. And obviously that's up till 2015, that was 50% of front gardens in London in 2015 were paved over, and obviously the speed at which that is taking place has escalated considerably since then.
A question,
so
please.
These are all sorts of problems associated with electric vehicles. Really great to hear what the NHS is doing about that, but what can you as industry leaders do to actually get the message out there that in fact your next car actually should be a bike or a bus or a train?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Doesn't solve congestion by just changing the drivetrain. And congestion...
Well, it's making congestion worse because the cars are getting much bigger and they can't pass each other. Okay,
a 2.5-ton Range Rover is still bigger than most electric vehicles, but nonetheless. Where do we start? Let's go to Claire and then Jacob.
Brilliant question. Thank you so much. So important that you raise all these points because, obviously from where we're coming from, it's very much that there's been not enough focus on demand side. And so really the whole focus of our work has been very much about, what about the whole system? But it is important. Electric vehicles do have an important role to play. But the problem is one really perverse thing that's going on. As the running costs, one of the big things, the big pull for buying an EV is it's cheaper to run. That's a nightmare for congestion, because that just means that there is no incentive to drive less. It's definitely going to make congestion worse, is the problem. So, and then of course that slows up all the other traffic. And, and all the other points that you make are totally important, valid, relevant. I agree with everything. I don't want to get into kind of siloed you've got to have it all. We do need EVs as well. They're absolutely fundamental from a health point of view, but yes, you're right about the tyres. Where's all that going? There's lots of, are we going to have a Tiregate moment? Is that coming down the line? But that's why we have to think about the whole picture. But also, crucially, what can we do right now? And what we can do right now is just, literally just reduce the sheer amount of volume of vehicles on the road. Absolutely. And that does involve cycling, walking, and modal switch.
Absolutely. Jacob, anything to add?
Yeah, first of all, I'd say I'm a firm believer in the travel hierarchy. So the principle that you get people, you reduce the need for travel, then you get them onto walking or bikes, then you let them onto public transport, and only at that point should you really be looking at electric vehicles. That's very much the spirit in which we work with organisations. We'd never recommend using an electric vehicle or any vehicle where a vehicle wasn't required. The interesting thing I've observed is that other countries in how they've regulated vehicle markets have actually taken quite subtle but effective action to reduce the size and the weight of vehicles. So they've taken the transition to electric vehicles as an opportunity to introduce regulations which kind of direct the market away from this bigger is better mentality around SUVs. Specific example, in China, they have the equivalent of our sort of ZEV mandate regulations, but they actually award different amounts of tradable credits depending on the curb weight of the vehicle, the battery efficiency of the vehicle, all sorts of things that ultimately incentivize vehicle manufacturers to make smaller vehicles that can drive further rather than bigger vehicles with gigantic batteries. Yeah. And that's something I think the UK government maybe missed an opportunity to do to the same extent, but also China is a huge market and they have one of, if not the biggest, I think they are comfortably the biggest battery development industries in the world. So they're in a position where they can sort of set the direction of the industry, probably more so than the UK. But I think there is a role for regulations like that. I think if we can take the opportunity to actually encourage vehicle manufacturers to produce lighter vehicles, some of the issues around the pollution from tyre and brake wear, I think, could be at least reduced. And if nothing else, we're saying we want a thriving UK and European and American automotive industry, and that all the threats of Chinese vehicle manufacturers entering into the UK market. The reason why it's such a big threat is because the Chinese automotive manufacturers are creating very efficient small vehicles that are really affordable to a lot of people, which is the result of their regulations. And we've not taken any such action. So I think there are things we can do about the vehicles themselves as well.
I would agree. And I think, thank you so much for your question, because what is key here is that we still have debate to have. There is no single silver bullet. There is no right answer, which is universally applicable. We have to continue the debate, the discussion, and to inform our supposed leaders of the policies and support that we need to make the right investments and the right choices for all of society. Nobody gets left behind. We don't have just rich people getting electric vehicles. We have everybody having access to decarbonised transport and buildings and energy. The Net Zero Club is something that we're looking to create, a way of taking this debate and taking it forward together collectively to thrash out precisely what it is we need as a nation so that we can put pressure on ministers to deliver. I'll stop rattling on because there is a gentleman in a fabulous green suit that I saw earlier, and he may ask a question based on that suit.
Thank you very much. Richard Quirr, leader of Wiltshire Council, another frustrating politician. I wanted to ask the flip side of that question. I represent I run a very rural authority.
Yep.
A lot of these solutions are great in an urban environment, yet active travel, honestly, in a rural environment is a pretty dysfunctional concept.
Yep.
How do we make this work? How do we apply this
Piece of cake.
to the rural setting? I wish it was.
It is. I did it for Scotland, and I can assure you that the vast majority of that is very, very, very rural. What it takes is highly targeted interventions with the right solution at the right time. And I think what we're guilty of doing is focusing on the low-hanging fruit. I think it was Kristen said it. And what we need to do is have a whole strategy which leaves nobody behind, and there will be different solutions for rural locations, as there are. In July, I spent a week going from Cardiff to London, London to Edinburgh, Edinburgh to Belfast, Belfast to Dublin, 5 days, 1,400 miles, 50 electric vehicles and 100 people. Not one of them failed to charge. Not one of them got left behind. There are black spots, there are areas that aren't provided for. We need solutions. One of the first things we need to do is to do gap analysis, to identify where those black spots are and to encourage commercial investment in those areas to support the rural locations because they are critical. But it's a great question. Anybody got anything to add to that? Andrew?
Yeah, just a very brief one. I put the example up about Hull. Hull, obviously very urban, but the Hull Trust covers Hull, but it also has a second site in Cottingham, which is into the East Riding. And it's East Riding hinterland, which is heavily rural, is massive. And horses for courses is absolutely the right answer. But one of the things that they've worked really hard on there is instigating park and ride services. So, and not park and ride as you might traditionally think it in terms of local authority puts in a whole heap of cash to build a park and ride, but actually working collaboratively with supermarkets who have additional spaces within their car park for staff and also with local bus operators whose services are often struggling to keep the commercial viability of those services going by providing incentives to NHS staff. So you're right, active travel may not be the solution for many parts of your area, but there are sustainable solutions.
And that gives me hope, Andrew. The work you've done with the taster of buses, brilliant, absolutely superb. Never seen that anywhere else before, adopted so well. So it can be done. There's a gentleman at the back there, really patiently had his hand up. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian Manders, and I'm a councillor and portfolio holder at Kingston Council. We are just replacing our diesel waste collection fleet with electric vehicles, and we had to wait a year for the connection at our depot for the appropriate group connection. Anyway, my question is about return to depot vehicles. I've never understood why it's been so slow for us to adopt electric vehicles for that, because it's an ideal situation. Vehicles go back to the same place for charging, a recognised route every day, and also cheap electricity at night. And also, it was in the 1930s, it was the major way we actually delivered.
Absolutely.
Small items were with electric vehicles. So my question is are we at a take-off point now for electric return to depot vehicles, or are there still barriers there which are preventing that happening?
Let's go to Chris first, because he does it quite a lot, and then maybe Jacob we can pick up with. Chris.
It's a difficult one to answer. So for us, we made that decision in 2019. We're going to go electric. It doesn't matter if it's a waste collection vehicle, a bus or a van, we are going electric. The problem in local authority is everyone's got maybe different administration, different priorities. Nottingham City Council are doing so much as well, leading the way in terms of vehicle electrification. I saw on the news yesterday that they might serve themselves a 114 notice, and I'm like, well, that's a bit of a problem. So 114 notice is basically declaring that they're going bankrupt. So things change in local authorities, even with government changes to the 2035 and stuff. We are still committed to reaching that 2030. We, I think, as London boroughs, are the best placed people to go forward in terms of electrification due to the distances we need to travel, due to the fact that vehicles return home overnight, due to that sort of tariff, cheap electricity overnight. We are the best place. So I'm here preaching what we're doing. I'm hoping next time I come back here or other shows, there's more London boroughs or boroughs across the UK who are doing exactly what we're doing. So, yeah.
And Andrew's data showed exactly that, didn't it? That there was a shift, a modal shift to more travel and public transport rather than using internal combustion engine sole occupancy vehicles.
Absolutely. So if we can reduce the fleet, which we're trying to do as well, and encourage our own staff to more active travel, EAV cargo, but whatever it might be, we'll do that at the same time, because we know less vehicles of course is better, but for us there's no reason why we can't go electric, and we're focused on doing that.
Good man. Jacob, anything to add?
Yeah, I've got experience of working with local authorities across the country, and one thing that seems to be common across all of them is that the traditional structures of local government are not particularly well enabling for electric vehicle transitions, and by that I mean as soon as you press a fleet manager to transition to electric vehicles, sooner or later they have to start asking questions about grid capacity, they have to start asking questions about energy demand, and that, like I mentioned earlier, not in their job description. And so it's not to say that they're reluctant to act, but it's that institutionally we haven't really had the mechanisms to deliver that for a long time. The local authorities that have taken action, I think, were the ones that started building those internal stakeholder networks and getting all the right people around this and taking a kind of a project view, rather than it simply just being a slight shift in a procurement behaviour. It's now actually a distinct project, and that's generally the best recommendation I could give in terms of implementing fleet transitions and depot charging. Don't just look at it as buying different vehicles, look at it as an actual transition project and treat it like a capital investment project rather than just a run-of-the-mill purchasing decision.
And I think choose your friends wisely. Cenex, great advice there, and got an awful lot of data that we can rely on to help model what impacts certain behaviours will have and certain changes will have. There's a gentleman right at the back. This is the very, 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 very last question. Right in the back at the middle.
So I'm Jason Howlett, CEO at Give Energy. So I'm going to ask a very biased question. Nobody's really talked about batteries in terms of smoothing out that demand for energy storage. So we have, our head office has 14 EV chargers, AC chargers, 50 kilowatt intake. We couldn't run all chargers without the battery. So we didn't do a DNO approval. We didn't go for a higher intake. We put a battery on there, so we charge it at night. We also have solar, which we charge the battery up as well, and pass that all on to the people who then charge the vehicle at a very low, cost-effective rate. Why are you not talking batteries to smooth it out? Why are you talking massive infrastructure delays with the DNOs that we've all talked about? What's stopping you?
There is absolutely nothing stopping us. GridServe do it all day, every day. Swarco, we have Claire Leclerc here from Swarco. They've been doing it for very many years. It's the logical, obvious solution. Somebody mentioned it earlier. I think it was Bob. Create your energy locally, use it locally. There's no need to distribute it. There's additional cost, emissions, all sorts of nightmares there. Let's make it locally and use it for local people. It seems the most logical solution there is. Whether it's hydrogen, electric, use renewables and use it locally. Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. It is lunchtime. Yay! We're only about an hour late. Right, go and get some sandwiches. See you back here at 3.